The moment I discovered the notification was the moment everything fractured. A simple bank transaction popped up on my screen, a rent payment, but the address was one I didn't recognize. Curiosity clawed at me, gnawing away at the comfortable life I thought we had built together. I followed the digital breadcrumbs, each click unraveling the fabric of our reality, leading me to a second life hidden beneath layers of deceit. When I found the lease, my heart didn't race. It froze. Her name, co-tenant beside another man, was a knife twisted in my gut. This wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated, methodical. A lifetime of quiet manipulation unfolded in front of me like a sinister map, each lie etched in sharp relief. The chaos of my emotions gave way to a chilling clarity. I wouldn't confront her. I would observe, collect every shred of evidence, every inconsistency that fell from her lips, and lay them bare. Silence became my weapon. I transformed my heartbreak into an archive of lies, each recorded detail a stone in my fortress of control. I watched her with the same curiosity an entomologist might reserve for a specimen, cataloging calls and calendar events, tracking her digital footprints like a predator on a hunt. Betrayal had burned away the weakness. I felt focus sharpening me into something unyielding. As I mapped her world, I learned the routine of her clandestine life. I became invisible, haunting her shadow like a ghost, observing her lunch dates, her stolen glances with him over cups of coffee. With every observation, the emotional pain morphed into strategy. Questions of why faded into the background. How became my mantra. I discovered her siphoning money, each transaction further connecting her to this charade. In that frigid silence, power began to shift. I let her think she was still in control of me, while the collective weight of my plans darkened the air around her. I'd haunt her thoughts without ever needing to set foot in her apartment. An open cupboard she swore was closed. A thermostat reset when she wasn't looking. The seeds of paranoia had been sown. I could almost taste the revenge. Not loud, but forensic, precise. Every moment of inaction was a calculated move on the chessboard of our lives. I withdrew, quiet but relentless, the fire inside me cooling into focused ambition. Soon, she would learn that the quiet man she thought she had under her thumb was a storm brewing just beneath the surface, patiently waiting to strike. I vanished. Not in the physical sense, but emotionally. The chaos that had threatened to engulf me subsided into a quiet stillness. I no longer reacted. I observed. Each lie, strand of deceit, or slip of truth became a note in the growing account of her betrayal. Documentation became my catharsis, a forensic analysis of the life I thought I shared, but which had already been dissected without my consent. I meticulously archived every digital whisper. Call logs rarely fell silent, each notification tinged with the heartless rhythm of her infidelity. Calendar events appeared like shadows, an impression of appointments with someone else, a lover concealed from me, their presence a gaping wound in what I had once cherished. I knew more than she would ever realize. Tracking apps remained dormant beneath layers of seamless trust. What had once been me, heartbroken, bewildered, now stood stripped of vulnerability. Betrayal had burned out the soft edges of my soul. I was left with ruthless clarity. My pain forged resolve. I redefined my mission. Gather evidence, analyze every inconsistency, unravel her carefully spun web of lies. I became a methodical collector of truths she never intended for me to find. In this calculated stillness, I started monitoring her clandestine life as if I were a ghost, haunting her reality. I found solace in watching her movements from a distance. Every cafe encounter, every laugh shared with him, fed my relentless pursuit of understanding. I documented their rituals with precision, each sip of coffee a testament to her double life. The deeper I delved, the clearer her masquerade became, an insidious blend of affection and manipulation. I discovered transfers siphoning money from our joint account, subtle enough to evoke little suspicion. An act of financial intimacy with another man, each penny lost transformed into a piece of my retribution puzzle. Questions of why faded into the background noise of purpose. The prime directive became how. How to dismantle the fortress she believed to be impenetrable. I let her bask in her delusions, believing she held power over me. I was the shadow in her home, rearranging dynamics without disturbing the surface. An open cupboard, she insisted, remained closed. A thermostat dial resuming its unapproved setting. Paranoia was a seed I planted with the simplest gestures, and I reveled in watching it take root within her psyche. The silence granted me strength, a profound understanding that stillness is a weapon, built on the bedrock of observation. I was no longer the broken man she thought she wielded like a puppet. I was steel, tempered by betrayal, waiting for the moment to strike. In this calculated game of chess, patience was my most dangerous move. I navigated the quiet chaos of my routine, my actions deliberate, each moment designed to enhance my invisible status. Her life had become an unwitting stage, and I was both audience and puppeteer. I observed her from a distance, the soft chatter of a cafe, a haunting echo of what we once shared. She sat across the table from him, laughter bubbling between sips of coffee. I replayed her words in my mind, dissecting their meaning, contrasting them with her unpredictable reality. I became adept at slipping in and out of her life unnoticed. I kept a low profile, positioning myself just beyond the periphery of her vision. Familiar faces became allies, the baristas who recognized her order, the waiters who delivered her meals. They were mere pawns in my game, but they filled the gaps for me. A wellspring of information flowing without question. Watching her through the blurred glass, I caught glimpses of vulnerability behind her laughter, a flicker of guilt perhaps, or maybe excitement that she thought I was oblivious. My heart didn't race, it merely thudded with purpose. Each observation peeled back the layers of her facade, revealing cracks I intended to exploit. She was slipping, and I was the shadow watching as the sun set on her duplicity. I spent idle evenings working on a digital dossier, piecing together facts. Every transaction pulled from our joint account was meticulously logged, a quiet reckoning taking shape. I traced the subtle movements in our shared finances, each withdrawal, each surge that guided her clandestine payments. The numbers stacked up like soldiers on the battlefield of her secrets, actions disguised as harmless gestures thundering like war drums in my ears. I pictured her, cushioned in denial, secure behind walls adorned with the lies she spun for him. Paranoia would be my strongest weapon, setting reminders, resetting thermostats when she left, ensuring the slightest hint of disturbance in her environment. I strategically rearranged items, leaving traces of my presence without revealing myself. Each ghostly brush against her world was another knot tightening around her chest. As I compiled evidence, I became acutely aware of how pain had transformed. I no longer questioned why I was subjected to this betrayal. I immersed myself in devising how to turn her world upside down. I was the storm, patiently brewing. She believed herself untouchable, surrounded by a mirage of certainty. Yet beneath that veneer of control, tension simmered. Each innocent smile, every well-placed word she shared with him, only deepened my resolve. I found more than satisfaction in observation. I found clarity, a precise path to vindication. I fed on the intent, the raw understanding that she danced upon a fragile stage, no curtain to shield her when the truth bared its fangs. And within this evolving theater, I crafted my strategy with calculated precision. The upcoming moves were nothing short of surgical. New tools lay gripped within the confines of my mind, sharpened each day by the glimmering blade of intent. Paranoia wouldn't just be a whisper. It would be her relentless companion, the unseen force that nudged her toward the edge of reckoning. Infiltration had begun. Silence became not just my shield, but the very essence from which my revenge would emerge. In this game of chess, every piece played had purpose. Each quiet step reinforced the shadows around her, dimming her light until it flickered unpredictably, made manifest by my unseen hand. Soon she would know my presence without understanding it. In her fortress of lies, she would tremble with uncertainty, haunted by the very ghosts she had created. The quiet man beneath her radar was only biding time, on the cusp of striking with the precision she never imagined I could possess. She would remain oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon, just beyond the mirror she thought kept me trapped. I turned her apartment into a psychological crime scene, though I never physically crossed the threshold. Instead, I let her imagine I was there, a specter haunting the shadows of her deceit. I observed from a distance, weaving a tapestry of her daily life into something unrecognizable, an open cupboard she swore was closed, the subtle reset of the thermostat that left her feeling a chill in an otherwise warm space. A whisper of paranoia invaded her mind, and I reveled in the power it granted me. With every small disturbance, I needed her to feel observed. I wanted her comfort to unravel quietly, thread by thread. It was not enough to confront her. I preferred her to live in a state of uncertainty, a ghost in her own home, questioning every shift, every subtle change. Each time she left the apartment, I would plant thoughts in her mind. What had she forgotten? A slip of paper? An odd scent? All of it underscored her burgeoning anxiety, feeding my thirst for control. It wasn't long before I noticed the shifts in her demeanor. At the cafe where I watched her laugh with him, her smile flickered like a faulty bulb. Were her eyes darting from side to side? Did she arch her brow in surprise, as if my presence loomed just beneath her skin? I discerned the moments when her laughter felt rehearsed, unnatural. They were signs. The cracks in her mask grew wider, and I patiently stood back to observe the inevitable collapse. Have you noticed anything strange lately? I could almost hear her voice in my mind. It echoed through our shared memories, resonating with an urgency that suggested she'd sought his reassurance. I embraced that thought without a hint of guilt. She was teetering on the edge of her carefully constructed lies, and I wanted to watch her tremble. With my meticulous surveillance, I saw her gather doubts like raindrops in a fragile cup, each drip threatening to spill over. I was rewriting her narrative without lifting a finger, editing her life with surgical precision. The world she believed to be solid began to dissolve as I crafted my invisible touch, bending her perception even when I remained unseen. Paranoia didn't need to scream. It merely whispered, allowing fear to take root in the spaces she thought remained untouched. I watched her navigate the increasingly blurred lines of her own existence, her laughter with him becoming occasionally punctuated by anxious glances towards the door, her casual conversations unable to mask the tremor in her voice. The balance of power shifted subtly, like the turning tide. I savored knowing she was growing aware of something lurking just beyond the veil. She was questioning her own sanity. Unseen, I played my part like an artist unveiling a masterpiece, a symphony of betrayal played in silence. I was 10 steps ahead, maneuvering every piece on this unforgiving board, all while she remained wrapped in her own illusion of control. My strategy unfolded like a flawless plan, each moment a careful stitch in the fabric of her unraveling. I was the architect of her doubts, and each thread I pulled tightened the noose of fear around her reality. Soon, she would grasp the truth. Reality was not a single entity, but a complex web of perspectives, and right now, I was the one wielding the scissors. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. The thrill of orchestrating her breakdown surged through me. Paranoia would become her constant companion, a soft echo in her mind paving the way for chaos. Words unspoken lingered heavily in the air, my thoughts colliding with hers, magnified by the distance between us. Soon her life would fracture, and I would be content to remain the ghost, silent, unseen, but omnipresent. Everything had started from a single notification, the one that cracked the foundation of our life. Now, as I stood at the periphery of her world, I felt the power of my observance como unyielding. The journey I set upon was one of precision, executed with the quiet genius of a predator poised to pounce. In this ruthless game, I would ensure she learned the true meaning of fear, and I wouldn't need to announce my presence. She would feel me in her bones. I embraced the methodical silence that cloaked my every action, recalibrating my existence into a dance of deception. Each new step I took felt less like a movement through a familiar world, and more like navigating a carefully constructed maze. The first whispers had echoed softly across her life. A misplaced item here, an unexplained adjustment there. Now the air crackled with the electricity of tension I had infused into her surroundings, and I reveled in that quiet chaos. With a burner phone secure in my pocket, I began my real work. The anonymity it granted felt empowering. Each sent message, each registered tip, sliced through the tangled web she'd artfully, yet so careless, spun around her discreet life. Her co-workers received gentle nudges, data points that would unfurl the tapestry of her indiscretions. Information trickled in under the guise of coincidence, raindrops pooling into a gathering storm. I sent evidence of her financial misdeeds, misuse of company funds, disguised so cleverly, yet now laid bare in their unrefined truth. Like thieves at a masquerade ball, I stayed hidden within the periphery of her masquerade, leaving behind breadcrumbs that would turn into a path of destruction. I had transformed from the silence that she belittled into a cold, calculated interloper. The new partner's spouse also received unedited call logs, the ring of familiar voices now drowned by the deafening ache of betrayal. The moments shared were nothing more than stark reminders of her duplicity, dovetailed carefully, just as I had envisioned. The illusion of control she maintained gripped her tighter with each passing day. Unknowingly, she had become one of my finest instruments, an unwitting accomplice in the unraveling of her own life. As I launched these stealthy assaults, I could almost taste the awakening paranoia lodged in her throat. She would come home, brow furrowed, feeding the gnawing uncertainty that tossed about in her mind like a trapped animal. I imagined her spinning tales in the safety of the cafe with him, I envisioned her laughter clipped with fleeting twinges of anxiety, the way her shoulders would tense at the slightest sideways glance. The crescendo built without the urgency of a cacophony. It was the stillness before the storm that bore down upon her, weighing her soul in heavy conviction. I did not need to witness her descent. I felt it woven into the strands of fabric left behind, the discarded truths, the moments of hesitation. Eyes darting, shoulders tight, she would become consumed by turmoil of a nature I had orchestrated. I delighted in this transformation, the gradual erosion of her facade, replaced by an authenticity she could not comprehend. The power in her life was shifting, meticulous and slow, pulling taut the strings she had once wielded effortlessly. I held the reins, my ambitions concealed in the folds of her growing anguish. Layer by layer, her confidence would fray and unravel until she would stand at the precipice of her own undoing, an architect of her demise built upon the scaffold I constructed. Her screams for clarity would fall upon my deaf ears. I sought only resolve, unmoved by her confusion, yet ever watchful, a punctilious predator stalkingly drawn towards its prey. Yet beneath the satisfaction coursing through me, there lay a coldness, a depth of clarity that cut sharper than any knife. The timing had to be perfect. I could already see it. I felt the world around her tilting, begging to spill over, teetering on the edge of an unseen precipice. The whispers had become roars in her mind, chipping away at the victory she held so tightly. Soon, I would release my final move, and the game would conclude. Not with cacophony, but with the quiet that follows grand chaos, silence lingering like smoke in the air. I watched from the shadows, waiting for her world to collapse, satisfied in the knowledge that it was I who held the pen that wrote her inevitable demise. The evening air tasted of sharpness, almost metallic, as I stood directly across from her apartment. Shadows danced beneath streetlights, concealing my presence from prying eyes. I had executed every detail of my plan, each move orchestrated to draw her deeper into the labyrinth of her own making. The air vibrated with the hum of impending chaos, and yet tonight, something felt different. Reports of her financial misdeeds had begun circulating among her co-workers. I had watched her confidence fray, her laughter grow brittle around the edges, panic tightening its grip when she caught sight of familiar faces. All those days spent encouraging her paranoia bore fruit, and yet beneath the satisfaction, an unexpected weight pressed on my chest. It was subtle, a mere inflection in the atmosphere. A sense of unease crept in, unsettling the foundations I had so meticulously crafted. As I peeked through the window, I caught sight of him again, her new partner. He was there, undeniably present, dressed in that casual familiarity, jeans, a black t-shirt, an easy laugh. Against the backdrop of my revenge, I watched them form memories I had once thought were ours. Fear rumbled against the edges of my mind, offering unfriendly reminders of my raw humanity. I'd imagined the triumphant unraveling of her charade, but watching them together chipped at the confidence I had so diligently cultivated. The plan I treated with clinical precision tinged with risk. What if he stumbled upon the truth? My carefully orchestrated revenge could easily become my own undoing. The cold truth settled in my bones. The overconfidence could lead to a lapse. I had buried myself in satisfaction too deeply, allowing doubt a moment to wiggle into my psyche. Perhaps someone had noticed the missed payments. The constant hum of secrecy had a tendency to rattle where silence ought to reign. My heart steadied, coursing with adrenaline as I recalled every step I had taken. There were no mistakes, only miscalculations. I focused, inhaling the night deeply. Each breath reshaped that unease into something sharper. Resilience. The blade of my will hadn't dulled. It had only been recalibrated. I retreated into the shadows. Instead of demanding the night, I would let it stretch its deep arms around me, allowing space for contemplation and adjustment. I dispelled the moment with resolve. If the path twisted, I would adapt. Survival lay not in the false comfort of rage or triumph, but in the cautious, precise movements of a predator when the elements of the hunt shifted unexpectedly. In the next few days, I would survey and gather intel, watching each decision unfold like an intricate dance. Her movements would guide my adjustments, and instead of threading her picture, I would illuminate it. There was no desperation in my plan, just meticulous strategy. Errors could meld into opportunities. Redoubled vigilance enveloped me as I turned my back to the apartment, my thoughts trailing behind with lingering threads of paranoia, a concoction I had aimed to instill in her mind. I was not yet out of control, merely recalibrating my strategy, sharpening my weapon of silence and observation. I would watch as doubt tightened its grip on her, as the edges of her certainty wore thin under the pressure I applied. Soon, she would feel it, not just see it, as though the air had gone thick and oppressive. The trap had not collapsed. It had merely changed shape. Tomorrow was another chance. That was the beauty of precision. I was not just playing a game. I was preparing for a series of calculated moves against a board that would expand and contract at breathtaking speed. I remained patient. The thrill of revenge was not a sprint, but rather a marathon I needed to approach with the cold elegance of a shadow that now cast itself longer with each day. The hunt continued, and this time, I would allow her the luxury of thinking she was still in control. She wouldn't see the blade until it was too late. I watched her from the periphery, a single figure caught in the web she had spun. Today marked the end of my calculated silence, the moment I had delineated so carefully now unfurling in swift action. She had her routine, predictable yet invisible, each repetition clinging to the comfort of denial. I had siphoned her ownership of her life down to fragments scattered across her existence. At the cafe, my usual haunt, I occupied a corner table vested in shadows. It provided me a vantage point. I could see her arrive, walking in with that practiced ease. Each footfall, a drumbeat syncing with the rhythm of my plans. I absorbed every detail like an artist taking in a subject. The flutter of her hair, the way her laughter echoed against the glass, the glances over her shoulder that transmitted her rising unease. With each sip of coffee he offered her, I felt the electric pulse of my efforts solidify. Her armor was beginning to tarnish. As I swiped through the digital records of her financial escapades, misuse here, illicit project funding there, the pieces fell into place like dominoes. I had sent the anonymous tips, casting shadows over her bright workplace. I could already imagine the chaos. Whispers forming halos around her, conversations eroding her reputation like waves against rock. Among her co-workers, the tide was turning. An email sent discreetly to the right people, a domino positioned perfectly to trigger a cascade. That was how I played the game. Subtlety draped over strategy, precision the core of my retaliation. It wasn't visceral. It was forensic. I saw the moment clarity struck. As she scrolled through her phone, a shadow crossed her face. I reveled in the knowledge that her world was electrified with doubt. She would never suspect me, not with the puppet strings I had cut. the setups I had crafted. Perhaps today, perhaps tomorrow, the threads she thought secure would snap. Deliverance arrived in a single breath. She'd argue, she'd cry, perhaps she'd even lash out. I remained silent, though. Her reckoning belonged to her. No words needed from me. I took pleasure in the knowledge of what would come next. Financial inconsistencies magnified under scrutiny would lay bare the truth she had buried. I wouldn't be the one to ruin her. She would dismantle herself piece by piece, caught in the web of her duplicity. Around the corner, I kept watch. The window frames distorted her world. The glass reflected her stress, magnified it. I waited beneath the canopy of night, concealed in the parking lot across the street, the engine idling softly. It wasn't a victory. It was the return of balance, a restoration of self I hadn't realized I desired until this very moment. I knew she would confront her lover soon. He'd be the anchor of her chaos. I envisioned the argument boiling, bitterness bubbling beneath their interactions. My phone vibrated quietly, the nerve endings of my plan tingling, each alert feeding the quiet excitement coursing through me. The final domino would fall soon, its descent culminating in her hysteria. I locked eyes with the double set of lies I'd revealed, an unmasked vulnerability I had orchestrated. She would throw her words like stones against the glass barrier I had erected around her life. There was power in my stillness, a mastery of the silence that screamed louder than any confrontation. The time had come. I released the breath I hadn't realized I was holding, an exhale of calm that echoed within me like the beginning of a new chapter. She would soon know this wasn't merely about the end of a relationship. It was about power, the reclamation of my own. Her cries would ripple through her universe, while I remained anchored in an unfaltering quietude, a looming specter devoted to the art of vengeance wrapped in the cloak of stoicism. I didn't feel joy as I prepared for the upheaval I had set in motion. I felt whole, for what she had taken from me had not been returned, but rather it had forged strength I never knew I possessed. And within this formidable quiet, I anticipated each twist of her anguish. I welcomed it. I was no longer the man waiting to be decimated. I was the architect of her existence, ready to pull the strings until she collapsed beneath the weight of her own duplicity. In that darkness, I found clarity. My plans unfurled elegantly beneath the stars, and I reconstructed my world. No longer a victim, now a force. I awaited the sound of her unraveling, and when it came, I would absorb it, cherish it, every scream echoing my newly kindled power. I was no longer lost in the chaos. I had emerged from it, stronger, steadier, and ready to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I relished the tension in the air, a palpable buzz crackling like electricity as I watched her world fracture. The whispers I had sown were spiraling into the void she had built, a fortress crumbling piece by piece under the weight of its own lies. Each moment I observed her, I felt the thrill of my meticulous orchestration manifest, an undeniable confirmation that chaos was circling. It was only a matter of time. I'd been watching her from my hidden vantage point, snug within the cloak of shadows, the cafe serving as my theater. Today's performance starred her, flitting nervously around the room, laughter spilling like water but faltering the moment she caught sight of familiar faces. Glances were exchanged, her comfort more fragile than the porcelain cups she sipped from. I could see it, the cracks stretching wide across her carefully constructed facade, the unease slicing through her reality with each forced giggle. The storm was building, and I was the tempest waiting to unleash its fury. I held my phone, fingers hovering over the screen. I had sent a single, loaded tip that would shatter her public persona. Financial missteps sent out anonymously to coworkers had unraveled rapidly. I had watched the aftermath play out, a slow dance of mistrust and accusation filling the air around her. I was weaving her narrative, my careful precision morphing into a chaotic freefall. "Have you noticed the numbers?" I could almost hear her asking her partner as spiraling uncertainty settled over her skin like a chill. I imagined her holding her breath, the walls closing in, realizing the safety she'd arrogantly taken for granted was but a ghost. My satisfaction was a dark river coursing through me, critical and steady. I could taste the implications of my work, the aroma of revenge lingering like smoke. Around her peers, they would whisper. Rumors birthed from my planted seeds now blossoming, blooming into full-blown paranoia. It wasn't just her job on the line. It was everything. Her friends would question, 1,000 discreet conversations weaving her fate alongside her descent. As she glanced around, searching for recognition, for reassurance in the eyes of others, I watched the confusion bloom. I had circuited her carefully. I could almost feel the panic taking hold, the whispers turning into mounting suspicion, much like a predator stalking prey, circling closer, closing in for the kill. "Why are you doing this?" Her fingers would tap out this message, trilling with urgency. I anticipated it with a breathless excitement that shot through me, a spark in the heart of the storm. I would not respond. I wanted her to grapple with the void I'd carved from her existence. I wanted her to understand that silence could be a more insidious weapon than any scream. Let her panic. Let her message linger unanswered, striking against the silence, echoing into a void where understanding could never reach. In the chaos of her unraveling, she would find no solace, no clarity, only the cruel echo of her choices bouncing back to haunt her. Her new partner would begin to question her, unaware that the storm overtaking them had begun to swirl far before he entered the narrative. He would misinterpret her rising anxiety as guilt, casting shadows over moments that were supposed to be filled with joy. Vulnerability would pierce through her laughing facade, igniting discomfort as chandeliers swayed under the weight of unspoken truth. I leaned back further into the shadows, savoring the anticipation. This stage was mine, each actor oblivious to the masterful manipulation of their narrative. Soon she would realize it wasn't just her lies that were collapsing. The life she built with him would fracture under the strain. My invisible hand had orchestrated this perfectly. The storm would break. Each drip of sweat beating on her temple signaled an approach of reckoning, a whisper that could swell into a ringing roar, but for now, the world was hers, encased in denial, trusting her own act a little too much. I could wait. The predator bides its time. It does not rush, but sinks in with intention, each moment a strategic placement on the board. And I was prepared to strike when she least expected it. The air around us would change, thickening like a storm cloud, swirling with apprehension. Her fabricated comfort would topple. She just had no idea how close the blade had come. For now, I relished the quiet, the perfect calm before the tempest. All that remained was patience, and soon enough, she would feel the blade graze her throat. A reminder that silence is louder than any scream. I stood at the edge of my existence, poised in the stillness of the night. The air was electric, charged with anticipation, as I peered through the familiar window, a portal to her life, now tinged orange by the lamplight inside. I marveled at the masquerade unfolding, a fragile facade held together by lies I had quietly dismantled. She was there, her laughter, a hollow echo, a flurry of gestures punctuated by glances, the way he leaned in, oblivious to the storm brewing at the periphery. Each smile offered to him a betrayal of its own, a spectral reminder of our shattered past. The tableau before me had deepened in complexity, vibrating with an undercurrent of tension I had meticulously woven into her life. This was it, the moment of reckoning I had orchestrated with exquisite precision. I shifted slightly, every muscle cloaked in the silence I had come to master. The final piece clicked into place, a sniper's breath before pulling the trigger. She would emerge from this, not unscathed, but irrevocably transformed, stripped of her certainties, laid bare beneath the light of revelation. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a subtle reminder of the chaos descending. I could almost hear her thoughts tumbling. What had she missed? Why was everyone suddenly whispering? The weight of suspicion would settle like shadows, thickening the air around her. I reveled in that moment, understanding that she wouldn't grasp the depth of her unraveling until it was too late. Tonight, the threads she had so carefully stitched would snap, each strand a delicate connection to the mask she had worn. I envisioned her fingers trembling over her phone, typing out frantic messages to friends for support, seeking assurance against the storm that was building within her. Yet, I would not respond. The silence would deepen, a void that amplified her confusion. Would they betray her too? Did they know something she didn't? It was no longer just her life crumbling, it was everything, cascading down in a spiral of her own making. And I, the architect, would watch from the shadows, an invisible specter witnessing the collapse of her constructed world. As I stood there, the chill of night wrapping around me, clarity washed over me like a sweeping tide. I was not just waiting. I was embarking on a new chapter where I no longer bore the title of the hurt. Instead, I had stepped into a role of authority, not out of vengeance but mastery, of control. A flicker of movement caught my attention, drawing my gaze to the new partner. He leaned closer, whispered sweet nothings, all misplaced trust in a woman whose heart was a house of cards. Did he feel it? The tremor of her guilt? Or was he blind to the storm that had gathered, waiting to break? As I continued to observe, I took a moment to acknowledge my own transformation. I was no longer a victim caught in the throes of heartbreak. Number I was reborn, a force, distilled and refined in the marrow of betrayal. The silence blossomed within me, an echo of all that had been taken and all that had yet to be reclaimed. In this final adjustment, I felt the thrill of inevitability pulse through my veins. Soon, each lie she brought into the light would fracture, revealing the raw truth beneath. The world I had watched her cultivate would splinter, and I would be the silent witness to her undoing. Everything had led to this moment, a stillness heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Each fragment of control I had seized tightened around her, an embrace that would soon prove lethal. I remained rooted in the shadows. A storm gathered at my back, and in that heartbeat of silence, I waited, relishing each second as the delicate balance tipped. It was time. I leaned against the cool metal of my car, the quiet hum of the engine blending seamlessly with the shroud of the night. In the dim glow of her apartment window, I watched her, now a tragic marionette, pulled by the strings of a web of lies she'd crafted. My heart remained devoid of sympathy, for the chaos that engulfed her was merely the echo of the turmoil she had orchestrated in my life. Inside, she fidgeted as shadows danced around her. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind, the confusion rippling through her like a poorly executed magic trick. The careful facade she had built began to peel away, layer by subtle layer, revealing the cracks beneath. Any semblance of control she'd held was now a mirage dissipating under scrutiny. The pieces I had sent, a barrage of anonymous tips about her financial misdoings, had begun to bloom. Friends now looked at her with doubt, their whispers mixing with the clinking of glasses, weaving distrust into her previously uncomplicated world. The very air around her thickened with suspicion, wrapping her in a cocoon of her own making. I felt the thrill surge through me as I watched. This was no simple revenge. It was the strategic dismantling of her life, a morning star shattering the tranquility of a midnight sky. And I, the unseen architect, reveled in my quiet power. Not glee, not joy, just a profound sense of control restored. The balance had shifted in ways she could never anticipate. Suddenly, I saw her reach for her phone, the device now a lifeline to an unraveling reality. A single text flickered on the screen. "Why are you doing this?" The very question hung in the air, ripe with desperation. She would claw for understanding even as the walls closed in. But she would not receive my answers. Silence was my shield, and curiosity, her punishment. I imagined her tension, the pulse of her heartbeat soaring as she awaited replies that would never come. I had found satisfaction in letting her squirm, her veneer of confidence deteriorating with every unanswered question, her mind spiraling into a panorama of uncertainty. I imagined her sitting there, the flickering lamp casting erratic shadows across her face, reflecting the tempest brewing within. My phone vibrated again, a reminder of her panic, and panic was hers alone to bear. I watched as realization dawned across her features like sunlight through the remaining winter haze. She was losing. This new partner, oblivious to the currents swirling around her, would soon feel the tremors of her crumbling world. I envisioned the confrontation, the moment when she turned to him, searching for solace, only to find disappointment staring back. He would ask the questions she feared. He would become the mirror reflecting the consequences of her treachery. Time stretched infinitely as I savored each moment. The uncertainty wrapped around her like a cloak, one she had draped over my shoulders. I was no longer the broken man, haunted by betrayal's sinister caress. I had evolved. I was the silent observer now, frozen in the night, waiting for the final act to unfold. Somewhere in that apartment, she began to shout at him, the vocal manifestations of hurt spiraling into confusion, a voice cracking under the weight of truths long buried, bared for all to see. In these moments, my heart remained still. I would not rise to witness her suffering directly, but I knew it was coming, inevitable as the rising tide. Their confrontation would unravel the strands of deceit woven into their shared moments, and I would remain hidden, invisible in the shadows I fought so hard to fully seize. A thrill pulsed through me. The glass she had balanced on the edge now tilted dangerously, the final moment approaching. The shattering would occur soon, the beautiful cacophony of her world collapsing into itself. She had no idea how delicately I orchestrated each breath she took, each smile she shared. Soon, she would stand amidst the wreckage of her creation, wondering how all the pieces had fallen apart. And then, as her facade shattered and reality came crashing down, I felt an unforeseen weight lift from my own shoulders. She had crafted her own demise, conjured it from the very lies we had both once lived. I stood outside, consumed by a silence steeped in victory, not celebration. I was not the one who had lost. The fire that had once consumed me was now embers illuminating the path ahead, one that she would not walk again. When she finally looked in the mirror, it would not be with pity for the bruises left behind. No, she would see a stranger, someone forged not in love but in betrayal, not cracked by heartbreak but tempered by searing truth. The balance had tipped with surgical precision, the weight of betrayal pressing both down and apart. I awaited her departure from this city, the layers of lies stripped raw, and when she left, without goodbyes, without lingering looks, I would be here, anchored in the profound emptiness our shared history once created. She wouldn't see it coming, her final act of departure, as my existence finally crystallized into something new, whole, and unwavering. And when I glanced in the mirror, I would see a reflection steeped in resolve, one that had risen from the ashes of the man I was. A figure unbroken, waiting in the silent echoes of retribution earned, no longer marked by her choices, but shaped by my own. I settled into a corner table at my favorite cafe, a place that previously exuded warmth and comfort, now transformed by an age of silence and clarity. A small, unremarkable table, with edges worn from countless patrons absorbed in their own stories, sheltered me from the world outside. I had come full circle, the same city but a different existence, every memory distilled down to fact, each emotional thread severed. The sun poured through the windows, casting long, angular shadows across the floor, a harsh reminder of the time past without her presence. My phone lay untouched, its screen dark and silent, mirroring my own state of being. No notifications, no reminders of a purpose once intertwined with hers. A blank slate, infinitely more peaceful than those tumultuous, chaotic moments spent trying to decipher her truths, hidden within lies. I pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. Not a letter to her, but a note to myself. A reflection of the journey forged through pain and rebirth. She didn't destroy me. She built the version of me that can't be destroyed. Each word flowed with the finality of a sealed envelope, the catharsis of acknowledgement washing over me. The weapon of silence had served me well. While she may have danced through life, wrapping herself in layers of deception, I had ventured into the depths of my own truth, a purposeful excavation fueled not by rage, but by the cooler fires of clarity. Every moment of her duplicity turned me from victim into architect, celebrating the unmaking of her false empire, brick by brick, with calculated precision. The cafe bustled with life around me, laughter, chatter, the clinking of cups, a stark contrast to the quiet within. I observed the couples, lost in their own worlds, unaware of what brews beneath the surface. It made me realize how utterly irrelevant she had become, another face in a sea of strangers. The drama I had orchestrated, her descent into despair, now faded into echoes, swallowed by the mundane events of life. I looked around, taking in the contours of this new world, untouched and fresh. This city had witnessed the ghosts of my past, yet now I found serenity in its unchanged landscape. Each street I had once walked with her stood resilient, a stark juxtaposition to the fragile dreams we had constructed. Rebuilding myself was never an act of revenge, but rather a necessary refinement, an acceptance that her absence served to propel me towards greater resolve, rather than diminish me. As the sun moved across the sky, I felt the finality of it all. I was no longer shrouded in grief over what had been lost. Instead, a newfound determination stirred within, a sense of freedom built from realizing that her journey had parted ways with mine. I could now step confidently onto a road unburdened by previous shackles, each footfall a mark of liberation. With the weight of indignation now evaporated, what lingered was the understanding that clarity triumphs over chaos. The silence I had harnessed was not just an absence but a fierce reclaiming of self, no longer defined by another's betrayal, but rather shaped by my own movement forward. I glanced at my reflection in the window. What returned was not the ravaged visage of a man wronged, but someone newly forged, unbroken and resolute. The emptiness around me did not connotate loss, but rather a fertile ground, ready for new paths, fresh beginnings unobscured by the past. In this moment of finality, I pushed the note into my pocket, a small reminder that each chapter closed with tragic beauty becomes part of a greater narrative, the narrative of reconstruction, of moving on. Today marked a new beginning, an efficient redirecting of focus toward the horizon lying ahead. As I stood to leave, the cafe faded behind me, footsteps echoing on the pavement, a soft thunder merging with the pulse of a city still oblivious to the quiet turmoil that had once haunted me so deeply. I walked away from the shadows, stepping into the light, feeling the chains of yesterday dissolve into nothingness, finally free to embrace whatever lay ahead.